Well, hello, everybody. Hey there. Now, last time I was here, I told you my testimony, my wayward time at Florida State University a few decades ago, and this is going to be a more sober address, if you see what I did there. So, the best part of my work week, every week, is going over to Neves and meeting with my American government class because we have a good time, at least I think it's a good time, talking about politics, talking about the lay of the land. You know, I actually bring candy. I'm trying desperately to get them interested. So I love politics. I've loved it my whole life. So many different things I've done and experienced as part of that. But there's another side to politics. There's kind of an ugly side, and I want to kind of frame how we think about politics and maybe try to mitigate some of that ugliness. What I mean by that is, some years ago, a woman in my church came to me, and she was emotionally devastated because her family had been torn apart by political strife. Her Sunday school basically was at war with itself over politics, and she begged me. She was like, "Can you please try to do something to address this?" And so I, sort of put my mind to it and have worked on this address that I have given in a variety of places about how maybe Christians should be thinking about politics. So, 10 things for Christians to keep in mind on the edge of a presidential election. Number one, our politics should be a politics for image bearers. The Bible tells us that human beings are special. They have dignity and worth. Actually, if you go back and look at Genesis, the very first thing it tells you about human beings is that we're made in the image of God. And so what I take from this is, one of the things I take from this, we must never, ever dehumanize other human beings and turn them into something we regard as other than ourselves. We always have to think of other human beings as bearers of God's image who are worthy of great respect and concern. In fact, when Constantine became emperor, the first Christian emperor, he took it very literally. He actually ended the practice of branding criminals' faces because he took so seriously the idea of the image of God on each person. Now, while the Bible doesn't kind of, just lay out this idea of democratic government that we enjoy, it's really upon this idea of the equality of human beings before God that we get the kind of rights and dignity and government that we enjoy today. In fact, when the world discovered the moral disaster of the Holocaust after World War II, really it was the understanding of human beings made in God's image that helped us to build the whole structure of human rights that we think about today and to develop the idea of crimes against humanity. Number two, our sinful nature should be an occasion for humility and charity. So in other words, we all as Christians, we have this understanding that we struggle with sin. And it isn't just that we're tempted to do bad things or tempted to commit particular sins, to be taken in by lust or greed or some other sin, but also that we have a tendency to think of ourselves more highly than we ought, right? To regard ourselves as always being right, never wrong, to impose upon other people. And there are people out there who will use this problem, they will use our emotions against us. They will stoke our fear, our anxiety, our hatred, and this is a very profitable business. There's actually a name for this. We call it conflict entrepreneurs, right? People who make money by generating conflict among people. And so if we will cultivate our sense of humility, we will be less vulnerable to being kind of provoked into this constant sort of fighting, prideful spirit. Years ago, a man named David Blankenhorn, a pretty well-known guy, came to visit me, and he had this idea for a group that would help human beings to relate to each other despite their political differences. And one of the things that we realized was that we didn't need to get people to compromise. We actually just needed to get people to recognize each other as human beings who deserve respect. And so we hit upon this idea of we call them reds and blues for obvious reasons, right? Conservatives and liberals. And we would put them together in a weekend kind of a conversation. And at the beginning, the liberals would say that the conservatives are all going to be racists, and the conservatives would say the liberals are going to be these fragile snowflakes. But we would put them together in this conversation, and we used a marriage counselor to facilitate the conversation. And believe it or not, despite their differences, at the end of the weekend, these people would say, I like these people, right? They learned to respect the fundamental dignity of that other person and the worthiness of that other person, and we need to have that same attitude. In fact, related to that work, in the last election cycle, I was invited by a very liberal Lutheran pastor who wanted me to speak with his congregation because he believes in dialogue, right? He disagrees with me about everything, but he believes in dialogue. And so he had me speak with his parishioners, and they're asking me questions about my beliefs, about the things that I think. And in the middle of it, this one woman just broke down into weeping. And I asked her, I was like, what's wrong? And she said, I was just so convinced that you would be a monster. I was terrified of who you would be, and you're actually a reasonable human being. You know, that the conflict entrepreneurs, they do this to us, right? They cause us to have this monstrous, terrible view of other people to whom we cannot even relate, and it's wrong, and we don't need to participate in that. And we also need to have some mercy for each other over the fact that we live in basically a two-party political system. You're not getting exactly what you want. There are tremendous difficult choices when all you have is A and B. And so people have to work through that, and we need to have some tolerance for people as they do that. And so finally, I would say along those lines, just be just to other people. Apply the golden rule when you deal with other people in politics, and I think that we can do a lot better. Number 3 is just to acknowledge that a lot of what we do in politics is not necessarily a matter of theological doctrine. A lot of what we do in politics is a matter of prudence, right? Just what's sort of wise. So how do we deal with the environment? What kind of trade-offs should we make? What's the right size of the government? How do we balance the budget? What's the right tax rate? How much should we spend on defense? I mean, I could go down the list. These things do not necessarily have a strong doctrinal answer. There are some that do, right? There are definitely some non-negotiables, but there are a lot of things that don't. And we should certainly be able to have a good dialogue with people about those things. What we won't compromise, and I don't think that we're asked to compromise these things, are the major doctrines. I'm never compromising the virgin birth. I'm never compromising the resurrection of Jesus Christ or Christ's status as the Son of God who can forgive sins. But I can compromise on spending and the environment and trade policy and diplomacy. There's a lot of room for compromise. We should work together when we can. Number 4, Alexis de Tocqueville, the famous French visitor to the United States in the 19th century. He wanted to observe this young democratic country and see what he could see. He wrote the great book, Democracy in America, that has probably never been out of print since that time. And he had a lot of good things to say about America, but one thing he observed is that Americans love democracy and become inebriated by the power of majorities. It seems like such an obvious way to decide who's right about something, right? We're in majority culture with Christian culture. Majorities have embraced many awful practices and continue to do so. Tocqueville was repulsed by the majority-supported repression of African slaves and Native Americans. And we should likewise have the courage and the constancy to resist practices that may have majority support, but which are nevertheless morally wrong. And so just as one example, some people revel today about pro-life defeats, which are happening. Pro-life might make bad retail politics. You might lose often being pro-life, but it's a righteous principle. The church has always stood against the use of abortion and the practice of infant exposure in the classical world, and it should remain committed to life today, whether it's popular or not. Number 5, politics is a dangerous subject, so restraint is essential. So first of all, if we think about what government is, I don't know if we think enough about that. Like, what is it really? Some years ago, there was a politician who said, well, government is just the things that we choose to do together. No. A camping trip is something we choose to do together, right? That youth retreat that's something we choose to do together. Politics is the realm of the non-optional, right? Government is the realm of the, if you wanted a social scientific definition of what government is, listen to this, okay? Government is the entity in society to which we give a legal monopoly on the coercive use of violence. I'll say it again. Government is the entity in society to which we give a legal monopoly on the coercive use of violence, right? Government is the one entity that can actually make you do something, make it stick, right? Mandatory, fines, jail, in an extreme case, execution. So this is really serious, and we should be modest and humble about how we approach government. It is not a Harry Potter magic wand, right? We should be very careful and reasonable about how we want to use it. And so it is not good to get all fired up about it like you do about an SEC football game or something, right? It's perfectly safe, I think, for you to hate Clemson or South Carolina or Alabama or Auburn. It is not safe to hate other human beings in sort of the context of politics. When I was young, in TV shows, you could count on a lot of, two devices. Quicksand. People were always getting caught in quicksand. I don't know if quicksand even actually exists. But the other thing that you would see a lot was nitroglycerin. Vials of nitroglycerin. Somebody's got vials of nitroglycerin in a truck, and it's terrifying because if nitroglycerin is agitated, it can explode, right? Tremendously dangerous. Wikipedia informs me about nitroglycerin. Unintentional detonation may ensue when dropped, shaken, lit on fire, rapidly heated, exposed to sunlight and ozone, subjected to sparks and electrical discharges, or roughly handled. We want our politics to be handled as though it were nitroglycerin. We want to be calm. We want to be cool. We want to be rational. You want to know how civil wars happen? You want to know how ethnic cleansing happens? It's when people let their politics get out of control. So we don't want that. Number 6, the Bible tells us to obey the authorities, but it also tells us the authorities are established by God, Romans 13:1, which means they're accountable to him. If we think about Acts 5:27, we can see the apostles saying we must obey God rather than men. So we have to remember we serve a transcendent God who is above the political systems of the earth, not within them. So in that sense, we live in a monarchy, not a democracy. And it's never acceptable to just accept the law as a final settlement. You might think about segregation or apartheid or something like that, from Augustine to Aquinas to Martin Luther King Jr. They all say that a law must be just in order to be a law. An unjust law is no law at all. Sometimes we might think that a lack of conflict reflects peace, but a lack of conflict might be just because somebody is dominating someone else. So what we really need is to have just relationships with one another. We need to treat each other justly. We don't all just do what we want, but instead we seek to be bound by just laws together. Number 7, this one is really important and really relevant to the current political scene. There is no politics exception to the gospel. There is no politics exception to the gospel. So what I mean by that is that we can't have this idea. So, and I've kind of highlighted Matthew 5:2-48, Sermon on the Mount, in terms of this sort of ethical code. When it comes to politics, I think that there is a growing sense among some people, including some Christians, that whatever it takes to win is okay. It is not okay. We do not say, well, we have to win, and so anything is justified. No, we always have to keep the gospel and the example of Christ first. The people in our political community are not enemies to be destroyed. They are friends, brothers, and sisters to be loved and persuaded. We should be ready to suffer insults instead of thinking of ways to deliver them. Machiavelli has not replaced Jesus as our role model. I think about a couple of interesting examples. Some of you may have seen the film Chariots of Fire, and one of the key characters is this Christian named Eric Liddell. And Liddell, who is, sort of the greatest runner in the world, he will not run his race because they schedule it on the Sabbath. And his convictions are so strong that even though he's going to lose the opportunity, he won't do it. Now, the reason I cite that example is that he is putting his faith before any worldly concern. Now, I take that example and I move it to politics. Chuck Colson has been dead long enough that many of you probably don't know who he is. But Colson is probably one of the most dramatic conversion stories since Saul became Paul. Colson worked for Richard Nixon when Nixon was president, and before that he worked for a number of other politicians. But Colson was the dirtiest again. And if you read it, you'll be stunned. It was a Christian book, but there's some stuff in there I can't believe they actually published. Because Colson would do anything for the politicians for whom he worked. And in fact, he even once said, I would run over my own grandmother to help Richard Nixon, right? That's who he was. And then Chuck Colson experienced a radical conversion. He talks about it. He's witnessed to by the president of Raytheon, one of the great American companies. And Colson goes out to his car and just begins weeping. He can't drive away because his eyes are so filled with tears, and his life changed completely after that. And he went from being Richard Nixon's hatchet man to being one of the great public Christians of the 20th century, who developed an amazing ministry called Prison Fellowship, reaching out to the most lost, the most disenfranchised people in the country. and also then the angel tree ministry, reaching out, to give gifts to the children of prisoners. So keeping your faith first, right? Moving from sort of a political identity, a fundamentally political identity, to a true Christian identity. Number 8, politics is another occasion in life for stewardship. So, for example, we think about what should we do with our money? What should we do with our time? What should we do with our health, our strength, our intelligence, these sorts of things? We need to think about politics in the same way. And the reason I say that is that there have been times when many Christians opt out of politics. They say, it's too dirty, it's too compromised, I don't want to have anything to do with it. But we actually have an incredible privilege that most human beings in history have not had. And that is that we have these rights to speak, to organize, to vote, to participate. We actually get to participate in making the laws by which we are governed. Don't throw that opportunity away, right? Use it. Use it well. So just to sort of sum that up, we are citizens, not subjects. Subjects are people who are acted upon. Things happen to subjects, but citizens are people who act, and we have the opportunity to act. So pray, exercise good judgment, speak with others, think, and then act in a just fashion. Number 9, politics is the zone of the penultimate. Penultimate. Now, penultimate is a tricky word. Penultimate sounds like the ultimate. It sounds like the ultimate, but even better. That is not what penultimate is, okay? Penultimate is before ultimate. So in other words, politics is not the greatest thing. It is below. It is below the greatest thing. And so the scripture that I've highlighted is when Jesus is presented with the coin, the coin with Caesar's image upon it, and asked, whether they should pay taxes. And his answer, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And what I take from that is that what belongs to Caesar is not the same as what belongs to God. Caesar is not God. His realm is not coextensive with God's. But we can become confused about that. So for example, there's a great book by David Koyzis, Political Visions and Illusions. And he points out that many of us are tempted to substitute a political ideology for our faith. And I'm not saying I don't have a political ideology. I do. But it always must be below that of my faith and the gospel. So conservatism, liberalism, socialism, nationalism, libertarianism, these can all take the place of faith, but it's wrong when we do so. And while I'm at it, we're in an age when a lot of young people are kind of like, I'm deconstructing my faith because of politics. If you feel tempted to leave your faith because you're repelled by who some other Christian is voting for, then you have completely gotten things out of order. Completely. The reason to be a Christian is not because of politics. The reason to be a Christian is the same one that Paul identified when addressing the men of Athens in Acts 17. Be a Christian because Jesus Christ has been raised from the dead. That's the reason to be a Christian. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are somewhat beside the point when it comes to that. The resurrection is a much bigger deal. And in their place. And my final point, number 10, there is only one king worthy of the name. The most significant political statement. I say this after decades of political involvement. After living and dying over elections, after having election day and then I'm so depressed I can't move, after being that way, after, going to airports to see politicians, all the different things, I have realized that the most significant political statement we can make is that Jesus Christ is King. That's the most important political statement. And so whatever you may think about Trump or Harris or anybody else, that is always way down the list from Jesus Christ as King. And by the way, just to reinforce that, I just think about God's warning to Israel about their desire for a monarch, right? He gives them this warning, they demand a monarch anyway. And then we look at the miserable experience of the monarchies of Israel and Judah. There are maybe three who kind of work out. One of the very best ones is David, and that's not even that great, right? So all of this is to say, Jesus Christ is the only king worthy of the name. And I just want to point back, the 20th century was, I think objectively, the most deadly century in the history of mankind. It also happens to be the century in which hundreds of millions of human beings put their hopes in secular messiahs who promised to bring about utopias. And in the process, as many as 100 million people died, were liquidated, not because of war, but because of disastrous political and social schemes designed to bring the millennium. Sinful human beings will not make a paradise of the earth through the use of force. Rather, we should follow the Prince of Peace and do everything we can to make him known to the nations. Ultimately, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. But it will not be because we created and implemented the perfect political plan. It will be because of Christ's love and his undeniable status as Lord. Thank you very much.